Thank you. How's everybody doing? All right, great. How many, just curious, how many actual libertarians do we have in the room? All right. I wasn't sure how many we were going to have, and I know a lot of mixed company here. But so this is I'm going to be talking about specifically not just foreign interventionalism, but foreign military interventionalism, and whether or not it's a good or a bad thing. And I think you guys could probably guess what my opinion is on that. But we're going to go through some of the statistics and look at some of the facts. This is going to be kind of more from a personal perspective. And I can share some of my experiences. When I was starting to put together a presentation for this, I found myself like going through and like, oh, well, when I was here, we did this, and when I was here, we did that, and going through, kind of details, and I could have ended up out in the weeds, so I had to really cut it back. I do have a lot of stories that I love to share with you, but we're just gonna, I'm gonna do my best to just focus on the topic at hand here, so go ahead with the next slide.
Are they sea stories?
I'm sorry?
Are they sea stories?
No, they're land stories. I was a ground pounder. So my background, or the things we're going to talk about. I'll give you a brief rundown on my background, my military experience, talk about what foreign military interventionism is, who benefits from this, who does it hurt, and what steps we can take to change it. All right, so a little bit about me. I joined the military shortly after getting out of high school. I did go to Michigan State University for one semester. I was one of the guys that decided I wasn't going to go into debt in order to get a 4-year degree, and I wasn't going to, I partied through my first semester and got some of my credits, and I decided, hey, I better do something different with my life. So I saw the commercials, right? Be all you can be. I wanted to get an edge on life, and of course, as you can see, the sergeant standing there, they offered the college fund. I mean, I wanted to get my college paid for. Why not? This was the mid-90s. We hadn't been at war in a long time. Why not? I can go get an edge on life. I can be all I can be, and they're going to pay for my college when I get out. It sounded like a great plan to an 18-year-old kid, so that's what I did. And then obviously in the back of my mind is this sense of, just a patriotic duty. That's just, hey, we're Americans. This is what we do. We fight for freedom. And so I signed up. I signed my contract. Go ahead. So after my training, my first duty station, this is just a list of my foreign military service. My first duty station was in Germany. I was stationed there for 2 years. While I was in Germany, I did some quote combat tours. I spent 6 months in Bosnia in 1998, and I spent 3 months at an air base in Tirana, Albania, in support of the Kosovo Air War in 1999. After that, I returned stateside. I was in Texas for a short while, got off active duty, joined the National Guard because I wanted to keep the state safe. I'm like, yeah, I know how this federal thing's going. I'm going to join the National Guard because that's more about helping people in disaster relief and stuff. So joined the Texas National Guard. We moved to Arizona. I transferred to the Arizona National Guard. I was in architecture school at the University of Arizona. I was in my second year, and I got the phone call. Hey, guess what? National Guard's not just for the state anymore. So I got 18-month orders, and I was deployed in 2004 to 2005. I spent exactly 1 year in Iraq and a total of a month in Kuwait on either end of that 1 year. So total overseas time I had was 3 years and 1 month of my total service time, which was 8 years and 3 months. All right, so what is foreign interventionalism? So the definition I found, I kind of pieced this together, so this is somewhat my own custom definition, but a policy or doctrine of intervening, especially government interference, in the affairs of another state to manipulate an economy or society. So it sounds familiar. I mean, we do, obviously, we do a lot of that. Specifically, we're going to talk about the military intervention. There's plenty of other ways that we intervene, foreign aid intervention, trade tariffs, things like this. All of that is different forms of foreign interventionalism, and I'm specifically going to be dealing with military interventionalism. A couple examples of where we see foreign military intervention is international policing. So we have something breaks out. There's an incident where two countries are fighting, or there's a civil war, and we feel like it's our obligation. We're the good guys, and we're going to go in and we're going to save the day, and we're going to break up the fight. Okay, that's the international policing. I didn't put the clip up here of Team America World Police, but that's kind of the concept. If anybody hasn't seen that, it's great. So it's actually pretty realistic. And then there's the peacekeeping missions. This is so after things have settled down, after say a civil war or a war settles down, we come in as a peacekeeping force. We keep the parties apart, similar to the policing, but really no combat. Right? We're just there, maybe some patrols, make sure nothing happens, but we're more or less just there as a presence. And then my all-time favorite is nation building or spreading democracy, right? So we don't like you as a democratically elected official. You don't comply with the foreign policy that we like. We're going to get rid of you, and we're going to install somebody who we think better represents the needs of our country. So they're kind of the prime examples. So how often does the U.S. actually intervene in foreign affairs militarily? I got this off Wikipedia, so that means it's probably 75% reliable, I'd say. So I think it gives us a good snapshot. I'm sure it's not completely accurate, but you can see over the course of time in the 50s, we're talking Korea, Vietnam, mostly Southeast Asia, into the 60s, kind of more of the same. 70s, you start getting into more Middle East, Lebanon, Iran, different areas in Africa. The 80s, now we're talking more Central America. We're expanding, so we're going to different parts of the world. And all of those from the 50s through the 80s is really in this effort to stem end the spread of communism. So a real noble goal. We want to end communism. We're going to save the world. Then we get into the 90s, and this becomes more of these peacekeeping. Some of this was the intervention in Eastern Europe. Again, in the Middle East, obviously, we had the Gulf War, and then into the 2000s, and then on. So all in all, I had the total in my head. I'm an estimator. I deal with numbers all day, so I'm checked out on numbers, so I'm not going to add it up again, but it's a lot. The graph shows kind of, again, I wouldn't call it entirely accurate, but if you can see, those are the places where we're at, where we have agreements to be, or where we have bases. So there is a fair amount of dots on that map. All right, so I'm going to give you some examples, and the examples I'm going to give you are again, these are kind of based on my personal experience. There's plenty of examples of international policing, but I'm going to go with the Kosovo example. So the background on the Kosovo conflict was there was essentially a civil war between the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, which is Serbian, and the Albanian Muslims within that region, the region of Kosovo. And there was the KLA, the Kosovo Liberation Army, was the rebels. The Federal Republic of Yugoslavia controlled the property, or the land. The Serbs did, and KLA was fighting against the quote ethnic cleansing that was happening, where the Albanians were being forced to flee. The U.S. or NATO, as we sometimes call ourselves, came in, and we decided that we were going to break up the fight. Right, so. We initiated there was the fighting on the ground already. We initiating a bombing campaign with planes, with missiles, cruise missiles, and we did a fair amount of damage. Couldn't find any real accurate numbers on what the estimate of the amount of money that we actually spent, but I saw estimates that said between 12 and 15 billion, so we'll go with 12, we'll be conservative. Interestingly enough, the mission never received any approval from the UN Security Council, which is typical, something you would typically see from this type of an action. Coincidentally, at the same time that this was going on, I don't know if anybody remembers 1999, but the biggest item in the news at the time was Monica Lewinsky, and then the Kosovo Air War happened. So it was fairly convenient. When I was stationed there, I was there, like I said, for 3 months. I was stationed at an air base. We were the ground force that was waiting to invade. The plan was that after the air campaign wore them down enough, I was there in support of a field artillery unit that launched rockets that destroyed a grid square, which is a square kilometer. So these are, really awesome weapons. They do a lot of good in the world. So they were going to go out, they were going to just carpet bomb the entire place, and then the Apache helicopters were there, and the Apaches were going to come in and clean up all the scraps. That was going to be the ground strategy. They did reach a peace accord before that happened, thankfully, so there was no ground invasion. I left in June of 1999 before the occupation force moved in. So we did have forces that moved into the area, but at that point it was a peacekeeping mission. So, question is, was this mission a success? Let's look at the outcome. So the results, depending on who you ask, it's 488 is a number that the U.S. agrees with. 527 is another number that's out there. So somewhere in there is the number of civilians that were killed by the U.S. bombings. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but this was only over the course of 80 days. So that's 6 per day. So 6 civilians were killed per day while we were helping these people. There was at least 2 Apache helicopters that crashed in training missions due to the high altitude in the mountains between Albania and Kosovo. We had ceremonies on the airstrip when that happened, and the war, the Civil War itself escalated tremendously once we started participating. So it was, people were fleeing, there was certainly bloodshed, but it wasn't until the U.S. or NATO got involved that the conflict really started to escalate. All in all, there was only a total of 13,421 people that lost their lives on all sides. So certainly not the worst war or conflict to happen, but there's 13,421 people that think it probably was not the greatest thing that ever happened. And the region is still completely unstable. So what did we accomplish? Next to nothing. But I did receive a colorful ribbon. So that, hey, there's some good things that happen out of this. All right, next slide. All right, another example. So peacekeeping mission. This one's a little bit different. So Bosnia and Herzegovina. We were, U.S. had troops there. Again, this was a NATO mission from 1999 to 2006. This was after a civil war. So the civil war was between, again, it was kind of an ethnic division between the Serbians and the Muslim Croatians. The war ended, and we moved in as a peacekeeping force. We spent roughly $1.65 billion in foreign aid during the course of the time that we were there. That money was so well spent. What they did is they said, hey, they called up people in Washington and said, hey, what do you want to spend this money on? They said, whatever gives us the fastest results. We just want to spend so we can get out of there. And didn't matter what the Bosnians need, and it didn't help at all. So it was the foreign aid, the $1.65 billion, was a complete waste. Had no lasting impact on the economy. If it was spaced out, and it could have been a lot more helpful, but instead the people in Washington knew better, and that's what we got. $15 billion in military expenses. So $15 billion, that's over 11 years. Relatively low dollar amount for that length of time. The force was fairly small. I'm not sure about the number, but remember it was a peacekeeping mission, so we weren't launching missiles and bombs and expending a lot of ammunition or fuel for that matter. There's occasional patrols, but mostly it was just an occupation force, so we were just essentially there. Great news, 0 U.S. service members killed by hostile fire. And that's despite Hillary taking fire when she landed at the base that I was stationed at. Right. Unfortunately, no, I didn't say unfortunately. So was this mission a success? Let's see, what were the results? So, the economy is stalled currently, right? The 50% of the business is currently state-owned in the country. Unemployment hovers around 25%. So by my math, there's 25% of the population contributing to capitalism there, right? So, is that a win? Yeah, I don't know, maybe. The country is still dramatically divided. So you have the Serbs on one side always openly talking about seceding, about splitting up again, and then you have the Muslims, Croatians that are, they have their own problems, but I don't know if they're anything like me, and the way I relate to California is I'd tell the Serbs, go ahead. Then, obviously, I mean, this is nothing that's unique to Bosnia, but there's corruption on all sides of the government. So, but I did receive another not so colorful ribbon, but hey, it's a ribbon, right? Blue and white. Then we get to spreading democracy, right? Operation Iraqi Freedom. We're still there, but technically Operation Iraqi Freedom ended in 2011. So this was everybody, yeah, spreading democracy, right? We yes, spreading. Things are being spread all over the place. So I'm sure mostly this wasn't too long ago. Most of you remember the intel. We have Colin Powell testifying. We have these unconventional weapons being used in Iraq and these weapons of mass destruction. And there was a reference to some chemical weapons, but certainly the implication was that there was nuclear weapons, right? That's what everybody was led to believe. Now, if you on Facebook today, you know, weapons of mass destruction can mean an AR-15. So, you know, who knows what really he meant at the time. But the implication was that there was nuclear weapons. So we did a preemptive attack on a country that was no threat to us, based on bad intelligence. That kind of sums up what we did for Operation Iraqi Freedom. U.S. spent $1.7 trillion during the course of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and still owes around $460 billion benefits owed to veterans. Now, they can save on some of that by the treatment they offer veterans because, you know, 20-plus veterans kill themselves every day, and so they can cut back on what they owe to the veterans in that way. Now, when we look at this amount spent, these dollars, the $1.7 trillion plus the $460 billion, you got to remember that we borrowed all that money. So what is it actually costing us is obviously significantly more because we got to pay the interest on it as well.
Where did the intelligence come from that they based their invasion on?
I think Dick Cheney swore on a Bible. No, I don't know. We had the CIA had you know, they had intelligence. It may have come from the Trump dossier or something similar. I'm not sure. So here are some of the results. Over the course of the war, 4,424 U.S. service members were killed. Unfortunately, I was familiar with a couple of those. 32,223 U.S. service members were injured. They only count physical injuries. They don't count mental injuries, so PTSD doesn't count, which is something that, again, affects, I wish I had the statistics, a lot. And it's estimated that around 655,000 people are dead that would not otherwise be dead if we had not invaded the country. So that's on all sides. So 655,000 people killed. And of those, 150 of them were journalists. Not all were from CNN. So that's some of that. I mean, it's a loss. 2.8 million people were either forced to flee the country altogether or were displaced within the country. And we know the future of the country is still very uncertain. It's incredibly unstable. Some more results. Uprisings have continued since we installed democracy. Right? They do have a constitution. They've had elections. They've forced out leaders. They've had new leaders. But democracy has not been fully embraced. This is not the type of democracy is not something that you really can force on people who don't exactly know what to do with it. So hasn't yet been fully embraced yet. Well, we're still hopeful. The Islamic State still remains a major threat. Obviously, that contributes to the instability. But the per capita gross domestic product is actually not too terrible. It's 7,000 with a 16% unemployment rate. So that stacks up with some other third world countries. But if you look at some oil-rich countries in the neighborhood like Kuwait, Kuwait's GDP is somewhere around between 55 and 60,000. So, there's certainly some potential for them to be doing a little bit better than they are. But I got another ribbon. All right, next slide. So who benefits, right? We know people benefit. Politicians, and I alluded to this earlier, the wag the dog theory. This, it's rumored that Kosovo was part of the reason why we were involved there was as a means of distraction. So these interventions used to, and I think this is kind of fading away with our current attention span being shorter. But it was a way to just distract people, right? Politicians can distract. When we distract somebody, let's send 10,000 troops to who knows where in Africa, and we say we're saving the world, and we can change the news cycle. Another thing it does is it helps with re-election. When we're in the middle of a lengthy conflict, people are more likely to support the current leadership because, as the devil we know is better than the devil we don't, and if things are going good, the politician says, "Hey, things are going great. We don't want to change now. Keep me in office." Things are going bad. They're saying, "But we're making such great progress. If we change now, we're going to lose it." So they win either way, right? And then, of course, they benefit financially. And, one example of that would be Dick Cheney and Halliburton. You can look at, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories, and we won't get into all those. But, the oil in the Middle East is certainly a financial incentive for some people out there. But next. Continued also aggressive legislation, right? When we are when we're at war and everybody wants to be patriotic, right? We want to be patriotic. We want to, if that means we have to give up some of our liberties for safety, that's what we're going to do. So they benefit from that, and they enact things like the Patriot Act, and we all support that because we're patriots, right? Obviously, they pass these oppressive laws that infringe on our liberties, and it becomes unpatriotic if you don't support the wars. What do you mean you don't support the wars? You're not a patriot? What kind of American are you? What kind of American are you? Right? And then, obviously fear and uncertainty is a huge political motivator. You think about this. 20 years ago, is there anybody out here who would have thought that you would think, 20 years from now, I think that it's going to be okay for a government agent to fondle a child at an airport? Could anybody have guessed that?
No.
Unbelievable, right? But freedom. All right?
Right.
America. All right. Who else benefits? Okay, so this is an example from my personal experience. So the truck on the lower left there, that wasn't the actual one that I drove into Iraq with, but it was very similar. So it's essentially a GMC pickup truck with a toolbox on the back. The one on the top was a 2.5-ton truck that we did put some armor plating on. While we were in Kuwait, we went to the scrapyard and we found some steel. We put steel on there. Was not ballistic steel. We went in with vehicles that were, I would actually be surprised if any of the vehicles we had were manufactured in the 90s. These were all Arizona National Guard equipment, so it was hand-me-down equipment. And that's what we went to. We had no armored vehicles. All of our Humvees had soft doors, canvas tops. We had the rifles that we carried were Vietnam era M16s. They were A1s that were converted to A2. And my buddy who was the unit armor did the barrel gauge testing before we left, and he said, I'm trying to remember, but I want to say about 75% of them failed the gauge testing. So you got a rifle, but who knows where it's going to shoot when you pull the trigger, right? I always wondered why I had a hard time qualifying in the range when I was at the National Guard, you know. But you know, what happened next? What happened next? We went to war. The military-industrial complex happened next, right? So this is in 2012. Some of the highest earners in 2012. Raytheon, 24.4 billion. BAE Systems, 28.3 billion. 31.5 billion. Boeing, 81.7 billion. This is after the war ended, by the way. This is 2012. The war had already ended. All right. But most importantly, who benefits? We all know who benefits the most, right? The bankers, right? Throughout history, we know bankers have funded both sides of conflict. Conflicts in their best interest. Why do we have perpetual conflicts? Because the people that make the money doing it, right? So some quotes up there, you guys can read them. Financing wars is expensive business. The scope for initiative was regularly extended by borrowing. So how do you have more wars? You borrow more money. It's always in the interest of the bankers. And Major General Butler, who was, I believe he was the highest decorated Marine.
Most decorated man ever.
Yeah.
Right.
Let us not forget the bankers who financed the Great War. If anyone had the cream of profits, it was all the bankers, right?
War's a racket.
Oh, yeah.
And who else benefited? The soldiers and the sailors, the airmen and the Marines. Look at them holding up signs. We got kids saluting who want to grow up to be Rangers someday.
Oh, God.
And look at all the medals that we get, right? Service members, we benefit, right? All right, next slide. And we all know, obviously, the rich and the powerful benefit from perpetual war, whether they're politicians, whether they're beneficiaries of the military-industrial complex, or whether they're bankers, right? But so who's actually hurt, though? Well, for one, the taxpayers, right? Obviously, everybody who pays taxes is hurt. Your tax money goes to fund war, which we see is really certainly not effective, right? As an example, while I was in Iraq, the company I was in, we were a support company. I was in the maintenance division, but we had a supply division. We supplied the whole base, which was the largest base in Iraq. They could order anything, and they did. Okay, so anything, if they could get the number for it, they would order it. There was almost no limits. People were getting all kinds of stuff while we were over there. Well, apparently there was a whistleblower. Somebody made some phone calls and they started an investigation. They found four 40-foot shipping containers full of equipment, electronic equipment, computers, furniture, you name it, all new in containers ready to be shipped back to Arizona, right? Why not? It's government's dime. Let's get what we can get, right? The good thing is that there was a criminal investigation conducted and charges were filed against the senior leadership of the companies. But, you know, why does a hammer cost $50? Well, because you got to pay for all this garbage. Who else is hurt? Families, right? So we see here these should be happy tears, right? This guy, his family, he's reuniting with his family. This guy's reuniting with his kids after coming back. The sad part about that is they're happy that they're coming home, but the reality is that next year they're leaving again.
Right behind you.
I had a friend of mine that he did his 20 years. He did 5 tours. One of those was a year in Korea, but other than that, he was 4. He did a year in Afghanistan and 3 tours in Iraq during the course of the war. He had 3 children and an ex-wife. And then obviously, I mean, young man there, that's the most time he's going to spend with his dad. Right, so we know obviously this has a big impact on military families. Then there's the foreign victims, right? We have you know, people who are injured. I had the real pictures up here, and then I decided I'd spare you guys. If you guys want to see gory pictures, you can find them yourself. I was fortunate enough to be on a recovery crew. One of our duties was after a car bombing was to go out and clean up the mess, and so it's fairly enlightening to come across the charred remains of what was 20 minutes ago a living, breathing human being. It can kind of change your perspective a little bit. The picture on the right, that's in Sarajevo. That's some kids on a tank after the Civil War. You can see the buildings were virtually destroyed. We didn't do that destruction, thankfully, right? But we were there to help them afterwards. And on the left, this is Iraq. Save us from ISIS, right? Displaced people in chaos. I can also tell you in talking with foreigners when I was there, we had I would do occasional guard duty. We had workers that would come in and work for us, and we talked to them, and they would tell us flat out, look, you know what, when Saddam was in power, we didn't lock our doors. Nothing, no, we weren't in danger as long as we follow the rules. I mean, here, being liberty lovers, we have a hard time dealing with this, right? Because you just had to follow the rules. You follow the rules and you were safe. Because they knew if they broke the rules, they'd be hanging from the light pole the next day, and they saw their neighbors. And so they didn't lock their doors. Nobody committed crimes. They were safe. And then we go in there, and it's complete chaos. They don't know how to deal with it. This is not their culture. And what do foreign victims lead to?
Terrorism.
Terrorists, right? So who else is affected? Obviously, victims of terrorism. So you have all those kids that are victims being displaced. We're occupying their space, and what does it do? It creates terrorism. So we breed terrorism when we invade foreign countries. I don't know if that's a disputed fact, but it's certainly a fact. So who's really hurt? Soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, right? Go ahead and hit the next button. You have homeless vets, you have injured vets, you have dead vets, and you have soon-to-be dead vets. That's a statistic. I don't know how recent it is. 22 plus veterans commit suicide per day, and 1 active duty soldier. So that's a problem. But what can we do to change it? One is stop glorifying war. There's no glory in war. There's nothing noble about war. It's terrible, all right? And for God's sake, don't support a military parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. So, yeah. We see on the left here, this is 1984, Soviet Union. On the right, that's Korea. In the middle, that's Iraq. And then, unfortunately, we may see a picture next of the U.S. military marching down Pennsylvania Avenue. How fucking ridiculous is that? I'm sorry for my language.
The soldiers come out.
Yeah. So, the other thing we do is we end this hero worship culture. Okay? It's easy to fall in the trap of saying, you know what, I'm against the war, but I support the troops. Okay? You can't sit on that fence. Okay? You cannot sit on the fence. You're either against the war or you're for the war, and you got to choose a side. All right? That doesn't mean you have to hate the troops, but what it means is you don't thank them. Okay? You don't thank the troops for their service because what they did was not good. And whether or not the service member is willing to accept that or understand that is a completely different story. But you don't thank them for their service. I can tell you personally, when I'm thanked for my service, it's a very uncomfortable situation for me because I don't like being rude, but I don't like saying you're welcome, and I don't like being confrontational about it. Right? It's just uncomfortable. Don't thank them for their service. If they're the type of person that wants to be thanked for what they did, then they don't deserve to be thanked. All right? Certainly be respectful. Treat veterans as human, but don't pretend that what they did was for a noble cause. Now, I can tell you that I didn't join the military with the intention of killing people or helping people kill people. I joined under false pretenses, but I joined. I raised my hand and I said, this is what I will do. Okay? And so that's what I did. I honored my oath. Unfortunately, part of my oath involved breaking my oath, but that's what I did. But what can we do? Just be honest about what it really is. What is war? It's terrible. It doesn't solve anything. Just like if I was to get into beef with Dennis right now and we go out in the parking lot and we slug it out, that's not going to solve a problem, right? There's still going to be a problem. It's going to create more problems, right? What else can we do? Well, if you're not courageous enough to discourage enlistment, certainly don't encourage it, okay? We don't need more veterans. I'm tired of politicians saying, we're going to do this for veterans. We're going to support our troops. For God's sake, if you want to do something for veterans, stop creating more of us, okay? There's enough veterans. The best thing we can do for veterans is to stop making more veterans. Go to next slide. So, what's the conclusion? If there was any question, foreign military interventionism is bad. It's not good. There's nothing good that comes out of this. It's bad. It's bad all the way around. Does anybody have any questions? Sir.
Well, Brian, first of all, very informative and very courageous. I'll have a big round of applause. But I've been struck by the number of people who are veterans, including combat veterans from overseas, who, and it seems counterintuitive because you don't see this portrayed on Fox News. You know, they're fair and balanced. Well, why aren't they telling us about this? But they respond in the way that you did about, don't thank me for my service. You know, I might have been well-meaning going in, but when I look at what happened, what we were doing there, we weren't defending America. We were conquering another country, and it created a whole raft of problems. And so I'm wondering how many of your fellow veterans that you know of have that sort of feeling. So
I think that my view is the minority view, unfortunately, right? I think that it's very psychological, right? It's much easier to buy into the hero worship. You know, I can come home and they're going to have a parade for me and everybody's going to thank me, and I did, you know, it's much easier for me to sleep at night going, yeah, you know what? I did a good thing. I fought for our freedom, right? Our freedom's not in Iraq, okay? We're losing our freedom in Washington, D.C., not in Iraq. But it's easier for veterans. It's a very difficult conclusion to come to say, you know what I did, all being well-intentioned as it was a terrible thing. I did bad. And making that, reaching that conclusion, I think many people reach it in their head, but really have a hard time with expressing it. And I think that's where you end up with this problem with suicide, is these people don't know how to deal with it. They know what they did is bad, but they're so conflicted because what they hear is that it's good. They're heroes. We have Veterans Day, we have Memorial Day that's been co-opted, we have Armed Forces Services Day, 3 holidays to support militarism. You know, why not suck it up? Why not take all my holidays and say, yeah, I did, I was one of the good guys. It's because we weren't the good guys. If somebody came over here, if I went over to my neighbor's house and knocked on his door and said, hey, I don't like how you're doing things here, and started throwing them around, I'm not the good guy.